This first segment of this episode of Critical Weeb Theory will have a quick reference to a scandal involving pedophilia. Other than that, please make sure to check out our guest, the Black Manga Critic. Have fun. Definitely. Well, I mean, there are definitely like some superheroes who are like, well, I fought like a corrupt CEO in a mech suit. I'm imagining like some fucking anime with like Jeff Bezos and like a mech and like a superhero, and it's just like, you're gonna let that Alabama warehouse unionize, Bezos. Otherwise, you're gonna taste my fist of 100 strikes. You fool. And he has like a robotic voice, like.
and then
so we meet again.
Then after that, and then everything was fine because Jeff Bezos was
Yeah, we got rid of Jeff Bezos, and like Amazon is fine now.
We killed the CEO of Ecological Collapse. Hello, this week we have BMC, or as he is sometimes also known, his alias, or perhaps on abbreviation, the Black Manga Critic. Where does the T go? No one knows. If you'd like to introduce yourself and talk about what you do.
Thanks for that. I have no idea where the T goes. Like, I have nobody remark for that, so I'm just gonna introduce myself.
Well, to be fair, BMC does sound better than TBMC.
Yeah, TBMC sounds like some like 90s like programming or something like that, right? Like, like on Fridays.
PBS.
Which are dope. But that's a whole nother conversation. I am the Black Manga Critic, but most people call me BMC. And I am a manga YouTuber, and I started off just kind of like I started off doing like videos where I just kind of talk about my ideas for about the manga that I was reading, and then I shifted to reactions for like mainly Shonen Jump manga, and then I was like, I don't only want to do Shonen Jump manga. I want to do like other manga that I'm interested in that other people may not be that other people might be reading, but people aren't really doing like reactions for. So then I started reading like Kingdom, and then I started getting into like some shoujo titles like Yona of the Dawn, and I started reading that and really loving that. And then I started reading titles like Battle Angel Alita, and then I really loved those titles, and I just kind of like gravitated towards that stuff and sort of started moving away from the Shonen Jump stuff. And I only reacted to like a few things from Shonen Jump, and then I was just like, and then Shonen Jump started like just, doing like and like the pedophiles just started, popping up again and again and again, and I was like, you know what? Let me just kind of divest myself from the weekly Shonen Jump manga.
So just slowing down a little bit.
Go ahead.
Just like for clarification's sake, you're talking about like several different people involved in like manga creation and production being outed as actual pedophiles.
Specifically at sorry, go ahead.
Notoriously, it was the Rurouni Kenshin guy who has criminal charges against him, and people still like wished him happy birth or happy anniversary, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, and there were certain mangaka who were like, hey, he's my friend. We want the best for him. We haven't said anything. We haven't said anything about the the pedophilia and the just like, I don't know, terabytes whatever of trigger warning child pornography. So that was a lot, and you can still see it now. So I just kind of divested from that and just kind of stuck with other titles that I really enjoyed. So once I figured out that I just kind of wanted to do anything other than Weekly Shonen Jump, I kind of felt a lot better in some ways. And I just kind of felt more free to just like read what I want to read. So that's kind of mainly what I do. And I also started doing like video essays, which are like, you know, just kind of like if I have an idea or a manga that I'm reading and I just, you know, wanted to talk about something that I thought was neat, then I might just, you know, write up something and then try to turn it into somewhat of a script and try to make it not sound like an academic paper, because that's kind of like my background. So, you know, that's kind of what I'm doing now. And then I just kind of shifted to, I don't know, like, you know, Twitter and other different things, and you know, doing a lot of like political education and stuff. So
Right.
that's kind of where I'm at now, I guess. Video essays, reactions, political education. Yeah.
Real quick, you're the manga critic. What is your favorite manga right now?
Oh man. I think, you know, I would say my favorite manga that I'm reading at the moment. I mean, there are a few, but if I had to pick one, it'd probably be probably like that I'm reading right now, Witch Hat Atelier. I don't know how to pronounce that, but that's probably my favorite right now, because it's just like it's just a really wholesome manga. That's just like, you know, fantasy based, and it's about magic, and you know, there's these like I mean, I'm not gonna get too much into it, but it's just like it's really wholesome, but it's like deceptively, like, maybe not deep, but just like it's nuanced. It's deceptively nuanced, like it's like, or like low key nuance, I guess, if you wanted to say it that way. Where there's actually a lot of stuff going on there. That Kamome Shirahama does, which is like talking about education and like, you know, discrimination and yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. So it's something that it's a manga that I highly suggest. Yeah.
Sounds cool. I have it on my reading list. And very soon it will come off my reading list and into my brain pound. But while it would be very interesting to have a long and deep and nuanced conversation about Witch Hat Atelier.
Yeah, I mean, it's I always say Atelier. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm like terrible with like.
Hey Mo.
It's a French word I can help with.
Yeah.
How's it spelled? Atelier?
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay. Atelier, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Atelier.
Oh, Atelier.
Yeah, Atelier.
Ooh, all right. I've been butchering that. And I apologize.
Oh no. Okay.
Don't apologize to the French.
It's like, hello, my name is BMC. I butcher the word atelier, and I watch Emily in Paris.
My Discord briefly crashed, and that was the best thing to come back to. Yeah. I'm gonna and I didn't hear this French disrespect or French undisrespect. Whichever happens, I am not complicit. Please ignore the fact that I will be editing this audio and thus will definitely be aware of whatever was said. All right, back to where we were. As much as we would like to have a long and nuanced conversation about Witch Hat, just as important is... See, I avoided saying word. Just as important is having a nuanced conversation about shonen manga. For one, there's obviously the pedophilia thing, which you mentioned, which is deeply problematic. But another thing we've definitely had very interesting conversations about is this idea of heroics and heroism. So I don't know if you have a specific place you want to start that conversation, but definitely one of the things I'm thinking of is like how much of shonen manga is based on hero narratives and what that could potentially mean for anyone who's, or for what that says about like enacting change.
Well, very quickly, I just gotta say, I gotta go grab my laptop charger because I don't want to conk out of this.
We're reaffirming hero narratives here, with the laptop charger being the only thing that can save this podcast.
Wait, well, I'll be right back. Just hold on.
Just go with it.
Give me a sec.
See, that's gonna stay on. So where we were at is, I guess we should start with like a formal definition so that we're all on the same page as to what we're talking about. So what is a hero narrative?
Oh, Mo, did you want to?
I don't know. I mean, you are the guest.
All right. So I guess
you are the guest. So why don't you be my guest?
Fraga, please. Yeah, but
that's also staying in. That's also staying in.
Yeah,
I would suggest you can give your own conception, and I've written about these to some extent, so I can give.
You would
not a counter definition, but a parallel one. Okay. Listen, buddy. Calm down.
You're a Novi. I love fun, so I'm not. I'm good. I'm chilling.
This is gonna end up being the pun episode. I'm calling it here. But before this becomes the pun episode, let's start with BMC's definition, and then if Mo and I have complementing or contrasting definitions, we will offer our own, like we did last time. By the way, did you like our last episode? Say yes, you assholes.
Yes.
Yay. All right.
I guess like hero narrative, and there are like different ones, right? Like there are different iterations of the hero. Can think of like the Byronic hero, the epic hero, all these different like heroes. But I think the sort of through line is always just there are, let's say, some sort of issues or problematics or whatever you want to call them, and the hero is sort of like the figure or the character or whomever that is supposed to kind of resolve those problematics or those issues, and depending on the narrative and the kind of hero, that those issues will be like resolved in distinct ways. If it's like a superhero narrative, they're going to use their superpowers, or they won't, as some sort of like weird like whoa, subversive like thing, or like if it's like an epic hero, then maybe they have abilities that are sort of like superhuman, maybe they don't, but there's like some journey, or there's some like war, or there's something that like is really monumental that they have to sort of be at the center of in terms of the resolution. So that's kind of how I would define it, but I don't know, that's kind of where I'm at with it right now.
No, that's a really solid definition that we can work on. If I were to not contradict in any way, but just kind of teeth more out of it, I would probably first say, so hero narratives, they've got a couple of like important traits to them, and the first one is that they're kind of like antithetical to like I guess like collective narratives, right? In a hero narrative, there's usually either one person or a group of people who are responsible for enacting like sweeping changes on the world that we live in. So if we have like an epic hero's journey, there's always like the one person who goes into the underworld and comes back and fights the bad guy, and then that single person is the reason why the entire world is like liberated from good or evil. Or if we have superhero stories, then like you either have a like one person or a small group of people, they beat the bad guy, they save the day, they get the girl, that sort of thing. Okay. The second thing is that the hero but the second thing is that the hero is like revered by a society at large. So the only exception to this is like anti-heroes, where like society like doesn't really like them, or they're an outcast, but they still have like heroic qualities anyway. But like we're not really talking about anti-heroes, we're talking about like traditional heroes. So the thing that makes them a hero isn't just that they're like some government bureaucrat like saving people. They're a public and well-known figure that people look up to for inspiration. And the third part, relating to those first two, is morality. Oftentimes the morality of the hero sort of serves as a stand-in for like the morality that society ought to uphold, right?
Yeah.
I'm thinking a lot about like My Hero Academia, for example, in which all of the heroes in that story have like some very clearly defined lines of like what a hero should be and what a hero should not be, and like what good is and what evil is, and how those heroes like All Might and the others like protect a sense of good in the world that they're living in. Okay, those were the three. Sort of not this. I don't want to say individualism, but like a rejection of collectivism, like societal reverence, and like a moral core are the three things that make up hero stories. There we go.
Yep. My addendum to this idea of the way we talk about heroes is, I think there are two key flavors of hero narratives. One of these hero narratives is like we see in shows like Code Geass, which is savior story hero narratives. It is someone comes in and they have the power to fix the problem. And until now, no one could fix the problem, but now this guy's here and he has fixed the problem. Hooray! And the idea, of course, being that, we need to find that guy or, elect that president or do whatever, right? But the big follow-up to that is I think there's another type of story that is aspirational, where you are supposed to see yourself in the hero. And you are supposed to be like, oh, this is someone I should become like. These, for example, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say something like My Hero Academia, or as the cool kids call it, Boku no Hero Academy. I'm sorry. I'm not, but I'm sorry. But anyway, like they do in Boku no Hero Academy, I think a lot of the readers are supposed to see themselves in Deku, and thus his traits are supposed to be seen as, like, in a sense, I don't want to say, like, I do want to say moral lesson, but I want to emphasize that it's not a moral lesson in the same way, like, the Panchatantra is a moral lesson. It's not like stories or, like, classic, I don't mean it in the sense of, like, classic morality fables where at the end of it there's, like, and then it turned out that doing this was good, but rather that in framing a character as positive and framing certain traits that character has as positive, what the story is saying is these qualities are positive. You should be like this person. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that My Hero Academia, like, more implicit than explicit, more implicitly than explicitly, like, reinforces the idea that, its intended demographic of, like, young kids should be like Deku. And whether or not it's a good thing is a question is a conversation we can have separately, but the fact that that idea is there in the first place. That's another thing I think should be critical in our analysis of hero narratives. Not only, like, the mechanics of it, but what traits do hero narratives say is good to embody.
Yeah. And like, and just kind of like, shouting out Mo's article on My Hero, which is like awesome. I like distinctly remember, and like that article was like, like kind of like the way that I found Mo and like and his work and everything, and I was like, oh, this guy's got it. All right. And
Thanks so much.
No, I mean, it's dope. If y'all haven't checked it out yet, please do. And I remember there's one part of that I think was really sort of like spot on, especially if, you're if you're, someone who is, sort of like engaging in like a radical sort of like political education, with folks, on your own, whichever. And like, there's that combo that, All Might has with, what's his name? Shigaraki, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and you talk about sort of like how, there's a way in which that's framed where Shigaraki's sort of like, he's like, and in that instance, he's really like spitting facts, right? He's like, yo, like, oh my, you're a cop. Like, you just like dole out violence because, the government like says you can, and folks like support that. And, and you're a hero because of that. And like, screw you, right? And it's like, why can't we like, be violent in like certain ways, in the ways that we sort of see fit, as people or whatever. And then like All Might's like, you folks like, you villains like to like spout, like nobility and blah blah blah, but you just like being violent, and like you're just like a sicko,
Mm-hmm.
And like the narrative sort of like is supposed to, right, like you sort of talk about, like the narrative is supposed to sort of, present Shigaraki as like this like sort of like white guy or white kid anarchist who is like doesn't really know what they're talking about and just like wants to like blow everything up, and like and like the narrative sort of does say that, right, like yeah, Shigaraki just kind of wants to like destroy everything, but like Shigaraki's not wrong in like taking the like All Might as like a cop who's like, a hero cop who's like doling out violence, and like, you know what I mean, like it's and
well, I think so it's Hiroaka is just like general refusal to understand that like people who don't like the status quo have like complex and like logical frameworks for how they understand it. Like when they see someone who commits a crime, they just sort of think it's because they have a crime gene. Okay, Hiroaka doesn't do. We're gonna talk more about Hiroaka later, but like it's kind of like you're like essentially evil, and you commit crimes because you find it fun to hurt other people. And so if you're saying things that sort of seem to make a little sense, they're not allowed to actually make too much sense, because the people who commit crimes don't believe in anything other than committing crimes for fun, right? And as such, it's like in Hiroaka, it's like the point of the heroes to stop people like that, and to protect the good and innocent people from the people who commit crimes for fun, right? Whereas in reality, most crimes are committed for either like economic reasons or for like political reasons, right?
Yeah.
Like you're committing a crime as a distinct act of defiance against a system that is cruel to you, or you're committing an act of violence because your circumstances have forced you into that position. Which
important to note in situations like this that the most common form of theft is wage theft. That never gets punished. Well, not strictly never, but like almost never gets punished. And so,
or just like a more pointed description is that wage theft is a much greater problem in terms of monetary value lost than any other type of theft, like several types of theft combined. But we spend much more, the state spends much more resources on countering all these other forms of crime than it does on wage theft.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so I think this is another step that we need to look into as a part of our hero narrative. If we're talking about heroes as a tool which enforces justice, which is not the only way to talk about heroes, as we'll get into later in this segment itself. But if we're talking about heroes as a tool of enforcing justice, we also need to talk about which crimes, or perhaps it's even more accurate to say, which sort of deviations from the norm are deemed worthy of punishment, and which ones are sort of like glossed over, because we never see, for example, in My Hero Academia, of like the heroes going to the CEO who's extorting his employees, and they're like, "Hey, you gotta pay your employees a living wage, hiya," because you can't really punch that. And I feel like a lot of sort of, not all of them, because as people, Umar especially, obviously she's not here, but like there are some stories that do talk about these things that I don't want to like essentialize and say that none of them do, but a majority of them aren't really interested in talking about problems that can't be punched in the face.
Right.
Yeah. And like systemic racism can't be punched in the face unless you put a face on it, at which point you've sort of devalued what systemic racism is and how it works.
Hey, I mean, the Misfit at Demon King Academy tried, so props to Misfit for trying to punch racism.
My God. My God. But is that not like the problem with the way, like, this is a great thing. Let's actually take a BMC. Have you seen Misfit at Demon Academy?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Have you seen the Misfit at Demon Academy?
I haven't, but it sounds like
okay.
I'd probably enjoy it. Maybe, I don't know.
Nah, it's trash.
Oh, it's trash.
Really bad.
No, it's trash.
It's really bad. I just wanted to briefly comment, because the Misfit at Demon Academy is a great example of a savior-based hero narrative.
Ooh,
in which our main guy, Anos, walks in, and he's like, systemic racism, solved that. Classism, solved that. You know, endless hatred and racism between humans and demons, done. It turns
potential
out
genocide, wrong. It's like the story basically revolves around, essentially there's like this dude, and it's like, as long as all the characters believe in his superiority over all things, then they get whatever they want, right? So there's
this is just Code Geass.
Okay,
Yeah.
listen. I know there are... Oh no, I'm gonna make a joke that no one's gonna understand, but like, Code Geass is the 3 coloring of anime, right? In which all bad anime can be polynomially reduced to Code Geass.
That's the taken and sticking by. I'm sure at least some people will appreciate it. But anyway, yeah, keep talking.
What was I saying? But yeah, like, Anos, he sort of, like, the whole point of the story is basically, like, as long as you believe in him, then you get the thing you want. So there are, like, sort of facsimiles for, like, leftist groups, or, like, anti-racist groups in the story. But they don't really do anything other than admit that the main character is super cool and hot and stuff. And because of that, he just solves the racism for them by killing the person who mates. There's like a dude, he's like beaming
the guy
hatred
made
into
up
the
first racism.
Yeah, there's like a dude who's like responsible for all the racism, and he dies. It's it's exhausting, but it's very funny.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring out Misfit at Demon Academy. I didn't just think of that on the spot. I was planning ahead. We'll pretend that's the case. I wanted to bring that up because it relates to one of the articles you shared, BMC, which was the When the Hero is the Problem by Rebecca Solnit. I think that's how it's pronounced. But definitely, like, Misfit at Demon Academy is definitely a big manifestation of the themes of that article, of how heroes often, because, like, democratic councils or, like, challenging your own biases are quote-unquote unsexy, the tendency of media to do the more quote-unquote interesting, quote-unquote action-oriented topic tends to, like, have these sort of things where, like, we've reduced systemic racism to a figurehead and then we punched it. If you want to talk a bit more about that article, because I thought it was really good, and we'll be putting it in the description.
Yeah, definitely. I'm actually gonna pull it up real quick. It's on one of my tabs. I think one thing that's really great about it is just, because there's just so many sort of just examples that Soul Knit sort of gives, and the way that it starts is just really it's just rhetorically like great, right? Like, how are you going to sort of talk about how do you start an article where you're talking about the problematic that is the sort of political hero narrative, or like just like the general sort of like hero narrative in our sort of realities. Well, you talk about an actual sort of environmental issue that happened in that was sort of going on in Farming Valley on the Laxa River in northern Iceland in August 25th, 1970, right? And Solnit sort of starts by talking about how community members, quote, blew up a dam to protect farmland from being flooded. And after the dam was dynamited, more than 100 farmers claimed credit or responsibility. There were no arrests, and there was no dam, and there were some very positive consequences, including protection of the immediate region and new Icelandic environmental regulations and awareness. Right? And then Solnit goes on to say that it's almost the only story I know of environmental sabotage having a significant impact. I would say, she's saying that's all she knows, but clearly there's like other examples, but in other instances, and she says it may be because it expressed the will of the many, not the few, right? And what she's kind of alluding to is like, she may not be more aware of other instances because of the ways in which those instances have been, that information has been disseminated, right? So like,
right,
we're gonna hear about Greta, right? And we're gonna hear about Greta until she dies, right? Like we just will, and it's like, oh, okay, I'm not necessarily, I'm not throwing shade at like
it's not about Greta specifically,
right?
Yeah.
It's not about Greta. It's just like the way in which those narratives are created and those stories are spread, right? And the consequence and the negative consequences of such.
Yeah,
so
exactly. I think the point I want to make in the article, they talk about a movie that was based off of what the ecological terrorism was, but in the movie that was based off of that, they reduce it to a hero narrative. They take it from a bunch of farmers who collectively agreed to blow up a dam to one person who blew up a dam under like pressure from a helicopter because they thought that was more interesting. And the point I want to draw attention to is that I think reducing these complex systemic issues to hero narratives is not only inaccurate, it's very it's not only counterproductive, it's actively dangerous. I put up this tweet a while ago, and I stand by it, of like, we've moved from individualistic solutions for systemic issues to individual solving systemic issues, and that's not really better. Instead of like going, oh, here is a way in which you can like get together with your community to decide how to like, best make sure your environment gets better, it turns into, here, you should just go like do something on your own, like grab a big fuck off whatever and go like blow up a dam without consulting anyone. And that's like not just unproductive, that's harmful, and more importantly, it's unrealistic. You go to someone and you say, hey, do you think you could like save the environment on your own? Do you think you could blow up a dam on your own? They're going to be like, oh, absolutely not, there's no way. And in a way, reducing what was how many was it, hundreds, thousands of farmers?
Yeah, like hundreds.
Hundreds of farmers, reducing what hundreds of farmers did to a single person turns it from something you can do with a bunch of other people in your community to something that is just impossible. Because people are going to look at that and they're going to be like, I can't be that, I can't do that. When in the reality, no one can do that. That's not, no hero is going to come in and solve ecological collapse. I mean, I guess if someone was like, destroyed everyone who ever created an NFT, maybe we'd make it.
Oh, okay, yeah. We'll solve global warming that way.
No, we won't stop global warming. We'll keep global warming from getting worse than it already is. I cannot stress this enough. the whole we need to solve global warming by 2030 thing was before people started making NFTs. So we're just like... Fuck.
But on that, I wanted to...
Existential threat of ecological collapse aside,
I wanted to emphasize, like, one of the dangers, I think, of hero narratives, and I don't think there's, like, no place in the world for a hero narrative, but rather, one of the dangers is that you can have situations like this story in Iceland, where when you look at the actual events that took place, the lesson here is if you band together with your community, you can affect a lot of change, right? But if you reduce that to a hero narrative, it sort of obfuscates like the opportunity for radicalism, right? So like it's not like you just said, Rugby, it's like not realistic or safe or advisable to go on your own and like blow up a dam, right? And so if the lesson that people get out of it is that, oh, one person blew up a dam and then it happened to work out, then nobody who hears that story is going to be tempted to attempt something else, right? But if the story is we got together with a bunch of people and we did a thing that we knew we had to do, suddenly that seems more realistic. Suddenly people say, I can get together with other people. I can join an organization. I can lobby for things. I can write things. I can organize things. So like there's like an inherent de-radicalization, I think, going on at the core of a lot of hero stories.
I mean, to go back to Misfit real quickly, like when the solution to racism is we need the guy to punch John D. racism in the face, of course people are going to be like, well, I guess there's nothing we can do about systemic racism. But of course there are things you can do about systemic racism. It's just that those are not presented as readily, and so people have more difficulties conceptualizing them. And that's not me trying to talk down to people, just that what media makes more or less prevalent influences what people think is more or less more or less possible. There we go.
You
right.
made it. So
yeah.
we want to...
no, sorry. Go ahead.
Because I was about to move us on, but if you had something on this, you should go.
No. I was kind of going to say, like, yeah, just like I think, especially battle shonen. Battle shonen tend to have a very... It's odd. There's a like a very loud sort of like sort of faux radical kind of I don't know what's the word I'm looking for. Tradition? Like message, like not even tradition, but just like there's usually some sort of way in which like the hero, right? The hero is usually the person in a battle shonen that's like, screw this, regime or monarchy or whatever it is, but that's like, messing things up, or making, or like whatever the like political problematic is, and it's sort of like faux radical because it's like, oh, we gotta rise up against them or whatever, but it's like, but then there's that contradiction where it's like, like. And I think that's where people kind of get mixed up, right? Where they conflate that sort of faux radical kind of, let's attack the regime and let's like dismantle the regime, and I'm gonna be the one to do it because I'm this one person and I have all the power. And they conflate that with like this, like with our own reality of like, right, where it's like that's not how this works. That's not like how like
this idea
a collective like a collective like radical politic is going to be is implemented or it continues to be implemented.
Right.
See this idea of like, oh, the true heir of like, this is the person who should really be in charge, and if this person who should really have been in charge was in fact in charge, everything would be fine. Of like, no, that's not. it's not so simple. It's not so simple as like, oh, if we had Biden instead of Trump, it would be fine. I mean, like, just look at the world around you. But it's not even as simple as if we had Bernie instead of Trump or instead of Biden, everything would be fine. It's not even that simple.
Yeah.
Right. Like, the problems are a lot deeper than the wrong person is in charge, and thus need to be addressed more precisely and more critically than the wrong person is in charge.
I think the truth is, it's like, there just needs to be like an acknowledgement that we're fighting systems, we're fighting social relations, we're fighting culture. And like, the hero narrative is not really, I think at least a takeaway from me, if you want it, I won't speak for the other two people here, but a takeaway from me is that, like, the hero narrative is not like inherently like problematic or bad or anything, but rather it's super often like misapplied, right? You can't do like societal change with the hero narrative. It's like weird, right? Because like you're like fighting like systems, right? And like the hero narrative is inherently like you beat up a person to save another person, and that person looks up to you, right? Hero narratives can definitely, well, I mean, there are definitely like some superheroes who are like, well, I fought like a corrupt CEO in a mech suit. I'm imagining like some fucking anime with like Jeff Bezos and like a mech and like a superhero, and it's just like, you're gonna let that Alabama warehouse unionize, Bezos. Otherwise, you're gonna taste my fist of 100 strikes. You fool. And he has like a robotic voice, like.
and then
so we meet again.
Then after that, and then everything was fine because Jeff Bezos was
Yeah, we got rid of Jeff Bezos, and like Amazon is fine now. It mellowed.
We killed the CEO of ecological collapse.
Mm-hmm.
Good job, team. Yeah, I just wanted to add that when we say hero narratives are unproductive and useless, I don't mean that leaders don't exist. Like, there have been several influential figures, like, you know, in the history of like fighting for like liberation, equality, like, you know, Malcolm X, you know, Bhagat Singh, etc., 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 etc. There's so many of them.
Thomas Sankara.
But yeah, the point is more that it can't be reduced to only those people, and then you neglect the movements that they were a part of, that they participated in.
Right.
Because it's not just smart guy with good idea appears and then fixes the problem. It is much more complicated than that, and it requires building of consciousness, and it requires like creating movements.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think, and it's interesting because I feel like I won't say that. I was, yeah, I'm not gonna say that because that's a little too sweeping. But what I will say is, I definitely think there's like, at the very least, like some sort of like correlation between like, you know, groups that adore those particular kinds of narratives, in particular like battle shonen narratives, and the sort of like aversion to any sort of like radicalization or you know, like there may be like a bunch of them, and like there may be like a group of them, and then like particularly like progressive, and that's not to say that like I would never work with like you know, folks who engage in like progressive politics or anything like that, but it's more to say sort of like that tends sort of to be the case where you see sort of groups like that tend to sort of like hold just like a weird kind of like hodgepodge of like anything but like folks that sort of like engage in like a collective radical politic. I don't know. It's weird. It's funny. I don't know. That's just like that's just my experience. So I'm not gonna say that's like everyone's sort of experiencing with that, but
Right.
I don't know. What do y'all think about that?
I don't know. I think that's a really solid point. There's something to okay, let me back up. I guess like the overall, man, I am like off the mark today. Wow.
You got that.
I'm sorry. Okay. Could you repeat the last thing that you were saying? And then maybe
yeah, just I guess just like I think one thing I tend to notice is and this is just in my experience, like in particular like battle shonen like fan bases or like fandoms tend to sort of hold this kind of like hodgepodge of political leanings and affiliates or whatever, where you can have like the One Piece let's say the One Piece fandom, but just like a One Piece fandom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the fandom that I was a part of, like you could have folks who were like some a bunch of folks who would consider themselves to be progressive, and that was me until like I was like, all right, like this ain't working. And like a bunch of folks that would consider themselves to be like progressive in their politic, folks who would consider themselves to be liberal, folks who consider themselves to be centrist, libertarians, and then folks who were just like straight up conservative, right? Like they were just like, oh, like just scumbags. Let's just right? And that was so interesting to me, right? Because but it was just like, hey, we all like One Piece, so it's all good. And that's something that I like consistently see in particular like battle shonen like fandoms. Like this weird kind of aversion to like not just talking about the issues, because like the groups that I was a part of, like that was something that happened, but it never really went anywhere. It was like this like it was like this like circular it was like this circular dialectic that which is just got contradictory, because like that's not the point of a dialectic, but it was just really weird, right? It was just really weird, and I would just constantly have headaches, and I would be talking to my partner, and I'd be like, babe, like why am I having these headaches? And then and she was like, yo, like these people are pissing you off.
Yeah.
And it was really just that simple.
Okay.
And
Okay, so I do remember the thing I was gonna say. All right, so it's it's sort of understandable in the sense that like obviously, so on the one hand you can say like, well, like a fandom for like One Piece, or like I guess like the Jujutsu Kaisen fandom or whatever, like they're there to first and foremost appreciate Jujutsu Kaisen and not necessarily to talk about politics. But it's like not necessarily that simple. Like as a counterexample, I was like one of my first like real like experiences with online fandom was like the Homestuck fandom, right? And that fandom was like primarily existed to like Homestuck. But it was also pretty like, especially like when it came to like LGBT issues, it was like pretty strictly positive in terms of those sorts of things. Like there was an understanding that you couldn't really like appreciate Homestuck and be like homophobic, right? Because you were like fundamentally misunderstanding some pretty important parts of the text if you held these two things like in common, right? And so it's like fandoms and the work that they're based around and the political leaning of those fandoms are like, they're like related. It's not like a one-to-one thing, but they are related. And so like the other thing besides like the actual text that affects them is like, who are like the big people in the fandom, you know? Like, is it like, because like a lot of like the people that do like, a lot of people that like cut their teeth on like Homestuck video essays are like well, they're mostly trans communists at this point. Thinking about it, I was like writing down some names, and they're like, yeah, communist. Okay, right. So like, who are the people who are like? But like, if you look at a lot of like shonen pieces, like it tends to be like a lot of dudes, a lot of like the kind of lowest common denominator, like white anime fan who's like has incredibly questionable politics that they haven't bothered to challenge. And it's like and to bring it back to hero narratives, like it's like one of the reasons why it's like worth like taking like a meta look at like a whole genre of stories overall. Because then it's like, if you like hero stories, you hang out with a lot of people who like hero stories, that they're ideas that end up in those fandoms and in those stories that you end up picking up, you end up using in other places.
Yeah. What I want to add to this conversation is I want to talk about a thesis I've been working towards for a while. That I mean, I have other higher priority things I need to write, so it'll be a while before I publish this as an essay. But the idea I'm working towards is that Discord servers are art, which is a clickbaity title way of saying spaces have ideologies. Which is, I think, critical in any analysis of like why are fandoms like this is, of course, because not just individual fans, but I don't want to say the fandom itself, because fandom is not a monolithic thing, but the space in which these fans congregate, in which they talk about things, has an ideology. And in the same way, like big tent organizations like, you know, the DSA can get dominated by certain like ideologies, even if they say they're big tent. The same thing can be held of like different fandoms, of like, even if the fandom says, oh, well, we accept anyone with any politics, it's like, well, do you accept fascists? Because if you accept fascists, fundamentally you have created a space that is hostile to anti-fascists. It is hostile to the people fascists target. Or if you create or if you say, oh, well, we let people just, you know, spread liberal misinformation in our space because we don't want to be about that. You know, we just want to create a space for people to discuss insert topic or insert viewpoint without, like, you know, making it explicit what our ideology of the space should be. Well, then you created a space that is hostile to anyone liberals are hostile towards, because the space will be, you know, it'll allow for that. So it's critical.
You're kind of cutting out again.
Oh, must be my Wi-Fi. So I think that's just like, that's a big part of like our understanding of like, one, it's difficult to talk about the Jujutsu Kaisen fandom as a whole, but two, if we're talking about like the dominant Jujutsu Kaisen fandom, like that section of the fandom probably exists in tandem with a lot of other Shonen Jump fans. And that means it exists in tandem with a lot of people who aren't ready to do political critique. And they see all political critique as equally problematic. And so when you have a space that's built upon that ideology, where those are the sort of conversations that are like allowed to happen, then you start to get, you know, the sort of behavior you described.
Right.
That's the argument I would make. And as a sort of a follow-up, just like, this is another thing I've been thinking about for like all sorts of reasons of like how you enforce moderation, how you enforce who gets to talk, who is allowed in the space, who's given precedence, who gets challenged, who gets to speak more, who gets to speak less, like all of this. And And all of these are based off of sort of what is considered the assumed default. Which ways of talking about anime are considered quote-unquote normal. And there is a way of talking about, like, One Piece that is considered quote-unquote normal, and it's not analyzing the political motivations of any villain. It's not calling out Eiichiro Oda for collaborating with pedophiles. That's not considered normal. That's not the assumed default.
It's funny,
That's not how we do things.
I will say the former, like the political stuff, it's funny, like because I think you will find videos that try to do that, but they kind of just do like a terrible job at it because they're just not really like reading, like they're not like, it's like if they, there was like one video that I watched that like Ash Ash and I, like who's another I would say former, I guess, One Piece YouTuber, but like we sort of like chuckled over because like this guy was trying to talk about, oh well, this part of the One Piece sort of narrative is like
before you
anarchic, sorry,
which Ash? Which Ash?
Ash,
two Ashes.
they're
or King Cocoa Butter.
King Cocoa Butter.
Oh, gotcha. Carry on.
And like, so
two Ashes, and they're both cool.
Yeah, they're great. They're pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And like, so King Cocoa Butter and I were just kind of like chuckling about it because it was just very clear that like, the person did sort of like a wiki dive into like, what is the far right and what is like the far left and what is like the center and that sort of thing. And it's like, yeah, you don't really know what you're talking about, but okay. And it was just this bizarre like exercise, where and it's just this bizarre exercise. And I think you have a lot of that in these fandoms, especially with a story like One Piece, because One Piece is very political, right? Like One Piece is always is sort of Oda's through the story, or just like the story itself, right? Like the story is sort of purporting these ideas about like revolution and regimes and like freedom and stuff like that. But like I have my own critiques of that, but like the ways in which people talk about that story, like it's just like a mess, like to be quite frank. And like there's just like a difference of like someone who is like doing the reading, doing the research, talking with folks about what they're reading and what they're seeing, and then sort of coming to like these, sort of like conclusions, and then disseminating those conclusions in like a video, right? In like a video essay or whatever. And then someone who's like, all right, I got to do this video because I think it's going to get me a good amount of views, and some like pseudo intellectuals would be really invested in that. So let me like check out the wiki for like a few days, put up my thoughts, and all right. And like if you just look at that video, like the number of comments who were just like, yo, you kind of don't know what you're talking about, or like, and like people who like you could just tell are like leftists were just like, yo, like what is this? And so it's and like that's the thing that kind of just like makes me laugh, where it's just like, yo, if you do shoddy work, like at the very least leftists will like like be like, yo, this is shoddy work. Like what are you doing,
in the same way that you can tell Code Geass was written by someone who had never studied a single revolution in their entire life. You can see a lot of like quote-unquote political analysis videos that are clearly written by someone who has never studied politics in their goddamn life beyond maybe like a high school level.
Yeah.
Right.
But just like, how the fuck are you talking about this without even like a basic material analysis? Come on. I was just gonna say, for a lot of times, I feel like the thing I want to say is like, y'all need materialism. Just not anyone watching Critical Weeb Theory, of course. You do still need materialism, but
it counts as reading theory. It has theory in the name.
Well, not even that. I was just going to be like, if you're here, you clearly know you need to apply a material lens when analyzing media. So it's not like you aren't aware. But for a lot of people, they don't even know that this idea of a material lens exists, partially because it's not taught. And so I see so much of people, even people who consider themselves, progressive, or more often liberal, and they'll like work backwards from a conclusion without even like bothering to investigate the circumstances. They'll just be like, This is true, and because this is true, and I'm like, wait, how do you know that's true? You didn't interrogate that. How are you? So go back to I guess my favorite theorist, Gayatri Spivak. Actually, I'm not going to do that because it's bad to misquote anyone, but it's especially bad to misquote Spivak. So instead, I will frame it to my own views. Like, how the fuck are you gonna like read "Can the Subaltern Speak" and then subaltern the person who wrote that? Come on.
Yeah. Which is so like the Academy, right? Like
instead, I will speak with my own voice of like, it's important to understand which context in which information was created, and then analyze that rigorously. Of like, as we've talked about on the show, with like the Thermian argument, of like, you can't just assert that because the show says this, that means it's true. In I have in dipshit anime season 2, protagonist guy says he's a socialist, and because of that we agree that we should support him. I'm like, wait, hold on, he's a Nazi. You can't just take people's word for you need to analyze. Or like, in dipshit anime season 2, the president of Dipshitia, Joseph Biding, like, he said he couldn't do anything, and that's really sad. It shows how hopeless the situation. I'm like, wait, no, hold on.
Can he do something?
We need to materially analyze.
What are the things that he could do?
Is it true that... Wait, didn't we learn in season 1 that this person, Joseph Biding, is citing as the reason he can't pass the Minimum Wage Act is just a non-binding recommendation they can easily ignore and work around if they wanted to? Didn't we learn before that, like, constantly fighting for re-election leads to situations where people always say that, well, we can't do it because we're worried about being elected, but if you elect us again, maybe we'll do it next time. Did we not, like, have this conversation in season 1? Why are we still having it in season 2? I'm venting my frustrations. I apologize.
That's good. I mean, like, I have so many frustrations about, like, most of, like, the sort of, like, particularly popular battle shonen and stuff. One Piece in particular, like, that was sort of my thing, like, in, like, that community. Like, I would just go off, and folks would be like, oh, there goes BMC again, doing his woke thing. And that was like to them, like, that was like me, like that's what I was doing, right?
Long,
but like
exasperated sigh.
Yeah, and there's one thing I kind of wanted to just like sort of pop up in, and it kind, I guess it sort of like relates to that, like, so how familiar are you both with One Piece, and it like if I spoiled something, would that be like?
Nah.
And I totally feel you about that. Like, like it's a frustrating story. And there's one point where like, I think my sort of like shift, like I just kind of noticed like my own shift in terms of like my politics, like the more that shift would occur, and the more I would read, and the more that I would talk with folks, and like be in community with folks, like you both, like the more the story just seemed really just like absurd in certain ways, in like what it was trying to sort of spoon feed you. So there's a moment in the story where so like Marines are like the bad guys, but you're not sure they're the bad guys because, whatever, morality, whatever. And so, like, but they're like scum. They're like cops. They're cops. They're the government. They suck. But, like, so there's this character, Garp. And anyone who's, read One Piece, seen One Piece, watched it, like, is caught up, knows who Garp is. And so Garp is sort of dealing with this issue where he, right, like, there's a war going on, right? There's, like, this massive war in the story. And one of his sort of, like, adopted sort of, like, grandchildren, they're held captive, right, like, by the government, and, like, they're going to be executed. So he's going to be executed. So his grandson's going to be executed, and who his adopted grandson is going to be executed. And, like, there's, like, and he is, like, literally, like, stands, like, sitting next to his adopted grandson as he's about to be executed, right? Like, because Ace is a pirate and he's a marine, and it's, like, it's supposed to be this, like, this really intense, like, oh man, what is Garp supposed to do? And it's, like, to, like, anybody that, like, has, like, a soul, it's like, yo, you're supposed to save your fucking grandson. Like, save your fucking grandson, you know what I mean? Like, that's what you're supposed to do. And, like, the story is like, oh, but his duty to the, to the Marines is, like, conflicting, blah, blah, blah. And I won't go any further, but, like, what happens is not, right? It's like, he does it, right? And then, like, after the fact, like, in the same war, he's like, oh, now I'm gonna go after the person who, like, ended his life, and, like, and the audience is gonna, readers are gonna root for me now because now I'm in action and I'm trying to, like, I'm like, dude, like, he's dead. Like, you sat next to him on the execution platform, like, in your cop getup, right? Garp the hero, that's what they call him. And, like, after the fact, like, you'll be like, all right, time to move. Like, what? No. Like, and what's really interesting is that the fandom is so sort of divided in this really bizarre way, right? Where, like, there are people like, but you have to understand, Garp was conflicted. You gotta understand. I'm like, no. Like, no. Like, this is not, like, and it's just a really, like, ridiculous conversation that happens. And that's kind of, like, in a nutshell, just, like, the ridiculousness that is sort of what One Piece is trying to, like, spoon feed you, and, like, it's just ridiculous. That's all I'll say about that.
Yeah. To digress briefly, I feel like we've been digressing a lot. Not that that's a bad thing. Not that it matters even. But to digress a step further, one of the, I think, most resonant lines I ever heard was the secret about morality is that it's in fact very simple. A lot of the complexity comes from justifications for atrocity. Right? Like, everyone should be fed. Don't hurt each other. Don't be racist. Like, all very simple things. The complex bits of morality are when, the ruling class has to justify why people are homeless while Jeff Bezos has billions of dollars. That's when morality gets complicated, because you have to all of a sudden add in all of these complex justifications to rationalize the cruelty, to rationalize why everything sucks so much. And I just think about that in regards to what you just said, of, like, it's very simple what the moral thing to do would have been, of just, like, you save your grandson. It's not that hard. But like, there's a lot of work that needs to go into, like, a lot of, like, complicated, often I would go so far as to say overcomplicated reasoning that goes into, like, explaining away the contradiction of, like, untying the mental knot of why it was okay for him to not save his grandson, because I think a lot of people will instinctively read that and, like, they'll get it. It's not that hard. It's not that complicated. Just do what's good for people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we should probably reintroduce the things you're working on at BMC, and then maybe it for this segment. Or
well, let's real quick. Is there anything else we have to say? Do we feel like we explored it?
I would say, I'd say I guess two things. Like, one, please, if you are a white leftist and you are listening to this or watching this or taking in this episode, please just like read some like black like scholarship by like black like radical scholars. Like just do that for me. Just like pick up one book, like pick up Sadia Hartman, pick up Fred Moten, pick up Sylvia Winter, pick
a
up
classic who's like easy to read. Du Bois.
Du Bois?
No, but like unironic, like people,
yo, for real, yeah.
Because he's like a middle school history figure, but like nobody tells you that he was like a communist who like really believed in the Soviet Union as like a future model for like black people in like society, right? So like and we also don't talk about his like economic
capitalist washing of historical figures.
Like, read Du Bois as well as the other names that BMC mentioned.
Facts. Just like do that, please. I beg. Well, I'm not gonna beg. Let me retract that. I'm not doing that. I'm not begging white folks to do that. But just do that. Do that. And I guess like you just kind of want me to talk about like my stuff, like the channel and other things, I guess.
Yeah.
A few things. I have a YouTube channel, which I've been on hiatus from for a few months. I'll say since December, roughly. Yeah. And I'm going to be getting back into that in April. So look out for that. You can just type in, Black Manga Critic and my channel will pop up.
I mean, it'll be linked. Don't worry.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you. And also, I have a Patreon that I'm going to get back to in April. I'm gonna finally get to that like One Piece and racism video because like I have to I gotta do that because people get on my nerves. In terms of that discourse is a mess. So there's that, and there's also a reading group, a critical like text like critical theory, radical theory, reading group that all three of us are a part of. So if that is something that you would like to be a part of, feel free to like contact any of us. We're always open for like, more people, more collective action, more like collective learning. You know what I mean? So let us know. And I think and I'm on Twitter. A decent amount. That's probably like my main social media, like, kind of like Twitter, Instagram, that sort of thing. Like I'm usually on Twitter. So you can follow me at the Manga Scholar. And yeah. I do a lot of like, ranting. So ranting about like capitalism. So, and white people.
They're
so,
good rants. They are good rants.
Yeah. They are. They are. If well, I would advise anyone who listens to Critical Weeb Theory follow everyone who has come on, but especially BNC. I think, if for no reason other than the very minimal great book recommendations in the Twitter handle.
Yeah. That's just fun. Like, that's just fun to do. Like, and every book that I recommend, I'm just like I've like, and I say this like as someone who often like will like start a book and then not finish it. Like, I've like every book that I recommend, at the very least in my title, like I am either in the process of reading if it's still in the title, and if there's like a shift, then it means that I've finished like reading that book. So definitely. I should make like a running list of the stuff that I put in the title at some point, and then just like put it in like a Twitter thread or something. But that's something that we can do as a group, like in like books that we read and like share text and stuff like that. That's something that we also do. So, if you have like suggestions and stuff like that that you feel like you'd like to read as a group at some point, we all like just kind of talk about it together and figure out like when are the best times to do that. And yeah.
Okay. I guess that being said, for this segment, this has been Mo Black. My pronouns are he, him, and
BMC. You just call me BMC. He, him pronouns. Yeah.
Well, wasn't that something? Up next, we have our guest Neil Kapit talking more about heroes. There are some pretty heavy spoilers to My Hero Academia, but no real content warnings this time, so I hope you enjoy. This was a fun conversation.
Hi, I'm Neil Kapit. My pronouns are he and him. I am what they call a content creator, specifically webcomics, also done essays in the dark days of blogs. And one of the things I did a lot of essays on was superheroes, or as they shall now be known, freedom manga.
Freedom manga.
Right?
Brilliant.
Brilliant.
Yes.
Yeah, it is great to finally talk to you. How do I say this without being corny? I really appreciate you because you're like the first person who ever sent me fan art of a thing.
Aww.
And it's still my phone background. So, yeah.
Oh, really?
Neil is
Thanks,
one of
that's-
my favorite people.
makes me very
one
happy
time
to
he
hear.
made a joke about being an anarcho-ruckaist, and I still think about that day. It's perhaps the funniest thing, the funniest singular thing I've ever seen. I don't know if you want to rehash that. Just like
I think it was when I made the offhand comment about that shitty rent-a-girlfriend anime when they're going on about how a rental girlfriend may not be able to heal people, but we can bandage it. And that was... I was thinking, like... So,
That's
Joe Biden
so painful.
is America's rental girlfriend... And, like, he follows up after America has just had a disastrous thing with a evil blonde and proceeds to try to keep up the illusion of being happy and stable while not really doing much to actually... And then somehow I got to the idea that, like, Ruka, who actually wanted to be Kazuya's girlfriend, was the Bernie Sanders in this case. And
Yes. It is unbelievably cursed that the analogy tracks so well, and I hate it. But thank you.
Neil Kapit, everyone. Brilliant humorist. You should check out his webcomic.
Wait, didn't you just release one of your comics for sale? We can talk about it towards the end as well. But...
yeah, the link will be in the show notes. It's Minnie and Max Monster Girl Detectives, a graphic novel I did during quarantine when I wanted something lighter and fun. So, urban fantasy about two girls who've been turned into monsters, monster girls, if you will, trying to get their bodies back and solving mysteries along the way. And I have something coming up. We Are the Wirecats, a reboot of an old comic I did, which is basically teen genius heroes versus capitalism.
Woo! Yeah. I've said this before and I will say it again. If you don't buy his stuff, I will know, and I personally will be incredibly disappointed in you. I just want you to know that, nebulous listener, okay? Unless you are Neil, I guess, in which case it's a moot point. But if you're anyone else, all right. One of the things that Neil does, if you haven't heard, is write stories about heroes, which I don't know if you know this or not, but if you write about heroes, you probably have strong opinions on heroes. Is this fair?
It's a little circular, but it checks out.
Perhaps.
And another thing Neil has the honor of doing is introducing me to the end of history theory, which I was, until then, blissfully unaware of. And I feel like that's as good a place to start as any. So, what is this theory? Why did people think history had ended? What's going on here?
So, it was at the end of the Cold War when capitalism had won against communism, and there was a sense that following the collapse of the Berlin Wall, this was going to be the new world order, that the American model of liberal democracy based on markets would be applied across the world, and that would be the perfect setup for everything, and we'd just be able to let the market and the political process work out any issues we had from then on. The term was coined by, I think he was an economic advisor for Reagan, Francis Fukuyama, who he later admitted that he was being a little dramatic by calling it the end of history.
But like the basic point that like liberal democracy has basically won, and like history from now until the end of time is just convincing other people with guns to do liberal democracy.
I think, not to be a Holly hindsight here, but I think you can just point to outside your window and say that things didn't work out very well.
It just immediately started to imagine claiming that you're at the end of history and then like having 9/11 happen like a year later.
Imagine claiming that you're at the end of history, then failing to consider that, hey, maybe this sucks. Maybe it sucks that people are still starving. I hope this isn't it. As we all know, the true end of history was going to come in 2030 with the ecological collapse of the planet accelerated by people selling fancy art on the stock market.
Really? I mean, I thought history ended in 2015 with Metal Gear Solid 5 and Kojima leaving Konami.
That's true. That's.
But I guess the stuff about ecological collapse and rising fascism and vastly increased inequality across the globe all tracks too.
Yeah. So we've brought up what end of history theory is. I think if you're listening to Critical Weeb Theory, I guess you probably understand why that's a bullshit claim, but we should take a moment to at least deconstruct it a little and like put the like logical gears on like why that as a theory doesn't really make sense. My argument is that human modes of production have never stopped changing. They've never stopped innovating. Everything would have had to remain entirely stagnant in order for any semblance of end of history theory to be sensible.
That's true, and it's already the state the world was at, even domestically in the United States, was very far from ideal when the Cold War ended. Maybe there was peace in the sense that we weren't engaged in any major wars and there wasn't a worry about nuclear war. And
we did immediately start bombing Yugoslavia.
Right, yeah. But that was more like an independent war project, like one of their smaller things subsidized by the larger military.
Yeah. There was no like large existential geopolitical threat. There was no Nazi Germany. There was no USSR. There was no the world is going to end because some guy in Russia pressed a button and then a nuke went off in DC or whatever. Right. Like that sort of crisis. cease to exist.
Of course, we were still in the world that was made out of that crisis, and everything the United States and its allies did in that war, like, I'm no tanky. I'm going to go take a big risk of being canceled and say that I do not stand Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin is not my PogChamp. He is cringe.
Not your little PogChamp.
Yet. But pretty much everything that communism did is blamed for by the usual reactionary talking points. The US has done that or worse, just in a longer span of time, because they didn't have to rapidly industrialize to be able to defend themselves.
Right.
And you can easily just point to, say, what Reagan, who presided over the end of history, did in Central America as evidence that we are kind of the baddies. We're fine breaking our moral superiority as long as we get a proxy army to do that, and how there's a direct line from that to what happened at the beginning of the year with the attempted coup.
Mm-hmm.
Like, of course, Trump, who came out of that era of 80s, that was when he made his big debut in the public consciousness, all but ordered the various right-wing dipshits to try and coup the Capitol, which is very much like what we've done overseas with stuff like the School of the Americas, just that there it was lethally trained assassins doing the bidding of our interests, often at the expense of democracies and human lives. And here, it was just a bunch of suburban assholes who watched too many PragerU videos and wanted to LARP as revolutionaries. And it's only a stroke of luck that it wasn't a lot worse.
So, we have, I think, set the historical stage. How is this idea of like the end of history? Yeah. Or just more specifically, how's the idea, the false idea that we've reached the end of history, under liberal capitalism related to how we tell stories about superheroes?
And is it possible that America's global hegemony influenced art globally and the way we think and conceptualize what is good and bad? This is news to me. I've never done a critical analysis before.
You're inserting politics into the animes?
Oh no!
Well, now I'm going to politics your heroes and their academia. A lot of the problems you can read into superhero stories, be they in Freedom Manga or Freedom OVAs, is that it's not like the overtly fascist jingoism. You don't see most superhero comics like going out of their way to promote the hero as waving around might to make right and taking pleasure in hurting people. Because like reactionary culture can best be exemplified in the muscular, sexy Donald Trump cartoons Ben Garrison does. And there's just nothing there. And it's not what's most of successful media because reactionaries just aren't creative. They don't have the kind of empathy that one would need for imagination. So all they can do is just like that kind of transparent power fantasy. But in something that is successful, that a lot of people do love and watch, like, say, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, there are these kinds of unfortunate implications, and they usually stem from just the idea that the status quo just is. Like, the way things are in America, this kind of democracy, air quotes, that we have, it may not be perfect, but it's the best there's going to be, so what are you going to do? So invariably, when they do bring up political stuff in Marvel movies, it's always going to be the bad guy who's a threat to the status quo. And it's going to be something like in Black Panther, where Killmonger has all the right opinions about how terrible colonialism is and how bad Wakanda was for basically just living in their gated city while the rest of Africa was terrorized.
Right.
But he's also a dangerously unhinged nutcase who wants to kill a bunch of white people. And at least in that movie, it does end with the Black Panther realizing maybe having my nation as a gated community was not the best, most responsible use of my power. But the fact still remains, what people take away from it is that the radical character is the bad guy.
I think it's important to keep in mind, especially when you're talking about the MCU, is that like the Department of Defense and the CIA, they literally like change scripts in Hollywood. The extent to which the US government has control over popular media in terms of like how it is presented in stories is a lot more than I think people realize. We get made fun of a lot for saying like, oh, you think everything is propaganda? Don't you think cat stuff just exists? But it's like, well, when the US government actively pushes messages in all of the biggest blockbuster movies ever made, like that come out of this country, then yeah, it is appropriate to talk about the propaganda that comes out of it.
Yeah, and I don't even think a lot of it's conscious, because that's what the writers grow up with. They grow up with these understandings of the world around them from the media they consumed and the culture they grew up in, and they do it without even thinking. And I should actually say, I really liked the Black Panther movie, and it's not even the most egregious example of this. And this is getting closer to the big anime that I'm here to cancel.
You're here to cancel anime?
Guilty as charged. So, how many people here do you think are familiar with My Hero Academia? Like, it's really big in terms of cultural impact as far as exported anime goes.
So the other segment in this episode did also talk about My Hero Academia. You're good. Don't worry.
Oh, okay.
Very briefly in the context of like other hero stories. I think most people who listen to it would be familiar, but it's always good to have a brief refresher of what My Hero Academia is and what it's about.
So, My Hero Academia is the most reverse weeaboo of shows, in that it's an anime that is very much inspired by American superheroes, and it takes place in a world where like 80% of the population has superpowers, or quirks as they call them. And it opens on the ominous narration, all men are not created equal. And it introduces us to a boy named Midoriya who doesn't have a quirk. And he's grown up to the age of 14 when we're introduced to him being a second-class citizen. Like, he doesn't have any friends. He's treated like crap. The closest relationships he has are to the bully that's constantly attacking him every day, and to his mother, who loves him unconditionally, but she treats him with more pity for what he's lost than faith that he can do something great. His life continues like this until one day when he has a chance encounter with All Might, who's the biggest hero in the world. He's called the symbol of peace because his very presence is a deterrent to crime, because he's so powerful and awesome.
Well, both of that, but like his like moral core is also incredibly obvious, right? He's Superman, basically.
Oh yeah, he's Superman. He's even blonde, unlike Superman. He's got the red, white, and blue elements in his costuming.
Didn't he like develop his powers in the United States with a dude literally named Dave?
Yes, he got his training overseas. He is technically a Japanese man, but he is the peak reverse weeaboo. And what Midoriya finds out is that he's actually in very poor health, and he's been pretending to still be the symbol of peace, but he can only use his powers for a few hours a day. His real form is not the super muscle man, but there's like this withering, blood-spewing husk of a man, and he's been trying his best to keep up appearances. But when All Might happens to witness Midoriya rushing in when he can't to save someone, he knows it's time to retire and time to transfer his power to Midoriya, because All Might has this quirk called One for All, which is like, I guess the name suggests that it's something shared, but there isn't any solidarity or camaraderie here. It's more like a monarchy. And that's the setup that Midoriya gets to be the next heir to this power. He's given a scholarship enrollment to this UA High, which is this super prestigious rich hero school. And from there, it's about him being trained as the new hero of the world, the symbol of peace. There are a lot of other heroes in this world, and the world building, whether through deliberate reaction against progress or just, as I mentioned before, unconsciously repeating what's been in all the other superhero stories, doesn't show anyone questioning things in a good light.
That's actually a really solid and helpful recap, I think.
Well, it's based a lot on Mo's article for Annie Fem about My Hero Academia. That was one of the things that I came across that got me following your work, and
this article's really doing work today.
Yeah. Do you want to real quick recap that article for the people who have not heard of it, or like its core central thesis?
Okay, yeah, sure. But basically, I looked at one of the villains in My Hero Academia, Magna, who's trans, and I basically I tried to tease out how the show treats her, who's like a trans villain, with a trans man called Tiger, who's like a hero. And I tried to figure out what the show has to say about heroism and how that relates to like being marginalized, in this case, being trans. And the conclusion I essentially came to was that the show essentially sees, My Hero Academia essentially sees heroism as like people who defend the status quo, which is represented by All Might. And villainy is essentially by people who are essentially bad and who try to change the world for the better.
Implicit in, I want to real quick note that implicit in that idea is the idea that, like we mentioned earlier with Francis Fukuyama's Ends of History, that this world is fundamentally good and any changes that need to be made to it are reformist and not revolutionary in nature.
Exactly. That's a really good point. So I'll go into this a little bit more. Essentially, Magna in the story doesn't really do anything wrong. She's a part of a terrorist organization, essentially because she needs help, like, transitioning and, like, being accepted for who she is. And this terrorist group is, like, the only group that she could find, like, that will accept her. And then so she commits crimes for this. To create a world in which she can actually be herself. And the story says this is a bad thing because she's changing the status quo, which is essentially good. It essentially like looks down on someone who's like engaged in what is essentially like revolutionary action to improve their material conditions, because that's a crime, and crime is bad. And then right next to her, it has like Tiger, who's like a rich capitalist who can afford to go to like Thailand to get like a sex realignment surgery. And who also has a quirk that physically changes his appearance to look more like what society would expect like a man to look like. And so he's accepted because he doesn't have to commit crimes basically to fit in. But Tiger is told that she's a villain because she has no other choice but to commit crime. It's a whole thing. You can read it. I'm pretty proud of it.
Yeah, and it highlights that like the opportunities presented to people are not distributed fairly at all. And Midoriya basically got the golden ticket. He's in the chocolate factory, by which I mean the fancy private school, and he's on the fast track to be trained to be the world's greatest hero. And while you can say, yeah, he deserves it, he's a nice guy, he's kind and brave, but ultimately there's so many other people who deserve, like, not even to become heroes, but just to have decent, dignified lives, and they don't get that. And Midoriya, of all people, should understand that because he is a second-class citizen. He may come from a fairly economically cushy life. He never appeared to have any problems with money because his conveniently off-screen overseas dad sends him and his mother enough to survive on comfortably. But he's still constantly been driven home this idea that he has no power, he cannot get power, and thus he's useless. He doesn't have any inherent wealth beyond what he can prove to society. And that made me interested in the show, and it's what made me fall out of love with the show as it became clear nothing was going to be done with that. To use some of my own life experience and thus confirming that I do have a life outside of anime, shocker. I mean, I grew up on the autism spectrum, undiagnosed. I had economically successful parents who were very loving and supportive. It was still a very largely lonely and unpleasant childhood when I left home. I didn't get along well with other kids. I was harassed a lot. And this is me talking about that experience from the perspective of someone who lived in the suburbs of Santa Barbara, which is definitely a very well-off part of California. And later I would do a year as a special education teacher in South Los Angeles around Gardena and see for myself a bunch of kids who, in addition to having the kind of developmental disability and emotional trauma, the added burdens and traumas of not being white in a society that's based on white supremacy, not having economic security. Some of the kids were even homeless, not having opportunities before them to make something of themselves, and having this incredible, just absolutely terrible set of circumstances thrust upon them. And I carry with it, if it on a daily basis, that I couldn't do much for them. I didn't expect that I'd be a savior. That would be way too presumptuous of me, and even I wasn't that naive back then. But there's so many structural impediments for kids who they all had talents, they all had redeeming qualities, they all could have contributed something to society. I don't mean to say that like they won't go on to do anything. Don't know where the kids are now. What I do know is just that the fact that anyone would have to grow up in such poverty with so little resources in a charter school that is literally bungalows on the parking lot of a more affluent school, and to have a curriculum that is special education is already like something that under capitalist logic indicates that the students don't have value, that they're put there to get out of the hair of the regular teachers, and if they work hard enough to maybe be back in the regular classes. I knew some kids who were very much aware of that fact, and they felt terrible about it and worthless and stupid.
I think a thing we should look at in our analysis is this idea of the system is fine, it's just that Deku was assigned to the wrong social standing. And this can be fixed by giving him the correct social standing of he deserves to have power, and now he has the power he should have had the whole time, rather than allowing him to remain powerless and succeed in spite of that, and like validating that as an option. It instead sees that as a problem to be fixed. It also reinforces this myth of a meritocracy where, you know, the most noble and the most just people are the ones who end up getting the power in the end, and not like complete assholes.
Yeah, as long as you dangle the possibility of upward mobility, you don't have to care about the probability of it.
Just the whole idea of that, like, that Hiroaka kind of pushes, in which it's sort of enough to find the one nice guy to give all the opportunity to, since the society is clearly and obviously working, he said, ignoring all the people for which it's not working. It does track all to all the people, both to yourself and all the people your like interaction. Yeah.
Oh god, that doesn't even bring up the stuff with Endeavor, the point where I just basically said fuck this and gave up on watching it.
The guy just does eugenics.
I think this needs to be brought up. It was brought up in Mo's article, and I haven't read far enough in the manga, so I'm sure there will be complaints that I haven't read every single part and double checked it with the wiki across all the spin-offs, so therefore my opinion isn't valid. So one of the professional heroes in the world is this guy named Endeavor. He's this big guy with fire powers. If nothing else, My Hero Academia has really impressive character designs. And when we're reduced to Endeavor, it's because his son is one of Midoriya's classmates, and Endeavor is a really abusive piece of shit. It's early on, it's implied that he basically forced his wife to marry him and bear his child because of genetically superiority, and that child has been abused to be molded into the ideal son to carry on his legacy. And early on, it does seem like this is a problem. This is a problem with the hero world, that we can have a man like this be rich and famous while being so abusive to his family. As the show goes on, Endeavor is the number 2 hero after All Might. Eventually, All Might's powers finally burn out in a big public battle with his arch nemesis. And by default, Endeavor becomes the new number 1 hero. And as expected, he doesn't have the kind of hero charisma that All Might has. Most people don't, in fact, like him. The only respect he gets is people who are afraid of him. And you'd think that this would be a good time to start showing consequences to Endeavor's actions and not give him a redemption arc. You might also think that as part of that redemption arc, you wouldn't try to give him flashbacks to show his own tragic past and to show that what he did wasn't really as bad, that he did really love his wife after all. You would think that, but you'd be wrong, and then you'd end up seeing Midoriya ending up going to Endeavor for guidance as kind of an additional mentor figure, with Endeavor's son starting to forgive him, albeit with reservations. And this definitely drives home the idea that the opportunities presented by society are not equal, and the best people are not the ones on top. And it does so in a particularly insidious way by giving a person who is just terrible. He's worse than most of the villains. I think that was an impression most of us got watching it. To give him the chance to redeem himself.
Just as like an addendum of that, like that's not a courtesy that's extended to any of the villains. Villains don't get redemption arcs even if what they have done is considerably less harmful than what Endeavor has done. And it's the same idea of like people will be talking on and on about how we should forgive like insert powerful political figure for atrocities they have committed in the past, as though that is like the be all end all, and like that same courtesy won't be extended to like people of color who are in jail for like just drug possession.
Yeah. As wholesome as All Might is, at the end of the day, he was still a cop. He was still there to dissuade any kind of violence, and by violence, that also means protest.
But he's on like the correct side of the status quo, right? And so he gets the redemption arc because he defends the system that All Might created and protected.
Well, the main villain, Shigaraki, explicitly grew up in an abusive household. He spent time on the streets. He was taken in by All Might's arch nemesis, All for One. And when All Might actually shows sympathy for Shigaraki, it's only because he learned that Shigaraki is All Might's mentor's grandson. And even then, like, while he's dismayed that someone who was close to him had a child who became this, he quickly gets over it when he realizes that, but he's bad now, so we don't forgive anything, and we're just going back to staying the course.
And we know it's not just petty crime, but like, yeah, it's like protests to secure better conditions. And we know this is true because we see characters like Magnet. And Magnet's not the only one. They're also like, there's Twice is the other one that I think I mentioned. There are other villains like that who are villains because society has failed them. And it is the hero's job to suppress them one day, like revolt.
Shigaraki doesn't even really have an ideology he espouses. He just wants to take everything down. And yes, there is a lot bad to be taken down, but the story was constructed so that the character who's fighting the status quo hardest is the psychopathic man-child with the severed hand for a mask.
You mentioned Shigaraki at the beginning. Like, he eventually forms like a paranormal liberation front with like a bunch of other forces. It's like a bastardization of what liberation fronts do in real life, which is a theme that I've noticed. We brought up Code Geass last time, we'll do it again. But if you have like, his ideology is not really, yeah.
But he's a straw man for what people think communists are like.
Yeah, that's actually, I think, a really interesting point. Because I've seen like people who try to analyze My Hero Academia, and they try to analyze like what Shigaraki's ideology is, and they say, well, Shigaraki isn't really a communist, and in truth, he's not, right? Because he doesn't really have like he's not really fighting for equality. He's just kind of fighting for like a vague anti-establishment kind of push. Yeah, he's what right-wingers think leftists are. So he is a communist. He's just like not. It's kind of it's a nuanced point that like a lot of people miss. I wanted to tie this back with what you were just saying, Neil, but I don't think I can right now. So please continue.
One thing I felt was important while I'm still here is to say that just like how our society doesn't have to be at best a stable illusion of a meritocracy with vast inequality that's merely kept in check by the threat of force. We can be better. We can demand better. We can make sure that kids don't have to live in poverty and don't have to grow up feeling terrible about themselves just for the way they were born. And for our stories, the media we consume, we can get better than just having these issues only come around as a little bit of flavor text to ultimately be dismissed. Like, My Hero Academia takes the kind of Ubisoft approach to politics, where it's brought up only insofar as it's something to make the bad guy seem like he's ripped from the headlines and then get dismissed as the hero dispatches the bad guy. But superheroes don't have to be that. The origins of the genre even aren't that. Like, Superman was created by Jewish immigrants, and he was created in the Depression. His earliest comics had him fighting the kinds of robber barons who were profiting off of human misery. Captain America, another good example, created by Jewish immigrants, went to war with Hitler before his own country did. And it even, like, some of the Marvel characters who are now become so popular in this century, like, they started out as the counterculture. And while you can point to something like X-Men and point out the many problems with the way it kind of does this civil rights metaphor through characters who are mostly pretty white people, it did, at its best, point out things like how hatred is not only irrational, but the people who perpetuate it often financially lucrative for them. Like, there is no reason for us to hate each other. We should have solidarity against the people who are trying to make us hate each other because there's money in it. Like, we don't have to listen to the Reverend Strikers who have this big televangelist platform on hating mutants.
In the other segment, we kind of mentioned, we talked kind of more meta on like hero narratives and like what they're good at and what they're not good at. And I think definitely like there is something to be said of like reducing problems to like individuals that's try to like solve systemic issues. That something that Hero Aka does a lot. But the whole thing about like superheroes in general, not like hero narratives, but like superheroes can and has actually absolutely like talk about what needs to change societally for the world to get better. Like what movements need to happen to bring us to a place where we're actually like closer to a world where you describe, where we actually have solidarity. We base our interactions on mutual aid. We try and progress instead of the opposite of that, instead of stagnating or regressing into some like mythologized past.
Yeah, what I'm hoping with My Hero Academia, probably irrationally, but I would like to see Midoriya become the kind of hero who has ambitions beyond his mentor, who wants to see a better world, who will go against people who are powerful and use that to avoid consequences. Like, the world of heroes is incredibly bureaucratized in My Hero Academia, and the heroes themselves range from being decent civil servants to publicity-hungry divas without any real care about actually saving people to abusive pieces of shit like Endeavor. And if Midoriya were to take a stand, like, for people like Magna, who are victims of circumstance, and instead of just flailing in reaction to whatever incidents pop up, he would certainly have a lot more enemies than he does now, and it'd definitely escalate the drama. He might even have to go against All Might, and that'd be a very dramatic scene, because it'd be hard for Midoriya to do this while All Might is completely out of power, stuck in his withered true form, has like however long he's got left to live after basically losing his lungs and stomach years ago, and feeling he has to kick his mentor down in order to stand up for what he believes in, and how he might think that he's disgracing the legacy of One for All, but if he has to do that in order to fight for someone who's not obviously innocent bystander, a child who needs to be rescued from a monster, then that's going to take the series into the kind of place that I honestly think it could go, because I was really enjoying it. I thought they did really well with the kind of emotional beats you get from a shonen manga, and the kind of struggle through grit teeth and tremendous pain to fight for what's right, but to do that for a much larger right than simply preserving what is.
Very, very excellent analysis.
Good job. Thanks, Neil. So, real quick, remind everyone who you are and what your deal is and the cool things you are doing.
Neil Kapit, he, him, web cartoonist, author of Minnie and Max Monster Girl Detectives, and the upcoming We Are the Wirecats. And you can check out my Patreon, where I'm putting up early content for Wirecats before its May launch, including concept art and early comics. Value extraction, go.
They'll all be in the places. There's no need to worry about that. As usual, I don't know why I say as usual. Well, I guess there are times when I am not Movlat. But in this instance, I am indeed Movlat. Pronouns are he, him.
I'm wrong about pronouns anything other than he or she.
And we will see you next time. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for having me. It was great.